All right. Welcome everyone to a pretty awesome event. Glad to see the chats coming in nice and good. We are so excited to be here. Not sure what the delay is going to be like, but we're going to hope for the best and just plan accordingly. I'm Mike Hartington, developer advocate here at Ionic, and joined by our co-founder and CEO, Max.
Hey everyone, how's it going? Well, I guess you can't
Great.
answer that question.
Well, they can through the chat, but I guess there's going to be that 15-second delay. Like we just got one hello, so we get a hello from this person. So great to see that everyone is getting the feed and having a great time and is really excited. We're super excited to be presenting about Ionic Vue today. So let's go over and add the slides to the stream for this. Go for that. So we're going to be talking about getting started with Ionic Vue. Max is going to give us a nice little introduction before we get started. So take it away, Max.
Cool, thanks, Mike. So yeah, I'm super excited to talk about Ionic Vue today, or rather building mobile apps with Vue using Ionic to do it. As Mike said, I'm Max, co-founder and CEO of Ionic, and I'm just going to give you a little spiel and I'll pass it over to Mike for the actual fun part of this. So really quickly, if you don't know what Ionic is, it is a mobile framework or mobile UI kit for building iOS, Android, and web apps using standard web technology. So you could think of it as a web UI kit, but targeted at the mobile UI experience that you expect when you use a mobile app. But it uses standard HTML, standard JavaScript, standard CSS. So a web developer should find it really easy and natural to build great mobile apps using Ionic. Ionic comes with over 100 components that are native quality. So they map to the standard native iOS and Android design patterns, except they're just HTML controls, which is really cool. A lot of the components have animation support. There's animation utilities for doing your own high performance animations. Components are gesture driven, so you can swipe items over and things like that. One of the really interesting things about Ionic is this concept of what we call platform continuity. So when you build one app, which is what you're doing with Ionic, you're building one code base and you're running it on all these platforms. They need to look different on iOS compared to Android. So platform continuity is a feature we have where we map, one code base, one set of markup for your UI, and map it to the standards for iOS when you're running on iOS, and then map it to the standards of Android, which would be material design. But it's still really easy to customize. So we have a full theming API. It's very powerful. You can customize anything you want. You can quickly set your brand colors. But you can dig in to make fully custom apps, which is really a goal of ours. So really simply, you could think of Ionic as a way to build apps that look like apps. They look great, but the difference with Ionic compared to something else is that you're just writing plain HTML and JavaScript in CSS. You're using standard Vue.js, which is what we'll talk about in a little bit. But the end goal is that you have an app that users love, that feels great, that's high performance with great transitions and animations, except the little secret is that you use standard web technology to do it. So I'm obligated to give you a little spiel about the fact that Ionic is a real business. So we're a little bit unique in the open source world in that we have a team and a business that's focused on helping teams that are building really serious mission critical apps and make them successful. So we've got about 50 people here working at Ionic. We are able to fund our work on the open source. So we have a really interesting kind of symbiotic relationship. So Ionic is fully funded. We have a team working hard on all these things. And what we do for enterprises is offer additional components for security. So managing like biometric authentication, storing encryption keys, things like that. Authentication components for single sign-on. So if you're building anything like that, you want our help, you want to de-risk it, definitely get in touch. ionicframework.com/enterprise. So again, obligated to give you my spiel, and I'll move on from that. So when you look at Ionic, one of the things that's really interesting is you're just using standard HTML tags, but you're getting powerful mobile controls. So if we look at this example, I'm using an Ion card component, and that's going to give me a mobile card UI, which has become really popular for mobile apps. And I'm just writing standard HTML. I've got my image tag. I've got some of these custom components that I'm using, like Ion card content. But ultimately, any standard HTML and CSS works to customize this or pull in additional libraries. And that same code is going to transform to be the Android material style when I'm running on Android. And I, as the developer, don't have to do anything. I get that transformation for free. So really, at the end of the day, we are trying to make building really high quality apps simple, but also make it possible for web developers to participate in this amazing mobile economy. So when we started Ionic, we basically looked at the landscape and saw, the only tools, the only services available for mobile were for people who wanted to use Swift, or I guess didn't exist back then, Objective-C and Java. And if you wanted to use web technology, there weren't really any options. So we said, what if you just unlocked the web platform and enabled it to build these apps and made it really simple? And that's really what Ionic is. And that brings me to Vue.js. So many people know Ionic as a quote unquote mobile framework for Angular. And while that was true for a little more than half the life of Ionic, it's definitely not true anymore. We still fully support Angular, but we're not just for Angular anymore. Obviously, the front end landscape has changed dramatically in the last 5 or 6 years. Certainly, other frameworks have come and gone, and few are as popular as Vue.js. And we have always been really interested in supporting Vue for a lot of reasons. And one of those is we just felt like it was very spiritually aligned to our goals as a framework. Back when we started Ionic, we were using AngularJS, so that's Angular 1. And one of the things that I personally loved about Angular 1 is it was all about taking a standard web page and enhancing it with powerful JavaScript controls that just worked at like a HTML tag, adding complex functionality, but still writing very plain, raw HTML. Obviously, we've kind of gone through a lot of different approaches to building web apps in the years after that. Some of them are much more complicated than others. But Vue is always, I think, stayed with that original goal of being this quote unquote progressive framework. So being able to enhance standard HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, but build really powerful dynamic apps on top of it. I know one of the things that a lot of Vue developers always say they love about it is I can just build a web app and I can add little bits of Vue here and there. I could go to a legacy site that used jQuery or something like that, and I can add Vue to bits and pieces of it. So that's always been kind of the spirit of Ionic, and we feel like the two are kind of a match made in heaven. On top of that, Vue is obviously really accessible. So it's easy to get started. It's great for beginners, but if you're a senior developer, you can build, the most complicated type of apps that you want to build. And so, it's easy to hire people for. They can get onboarded quickly. A lot of people can work on Vue apps. That's really, really great. And it's fast from the beginning and stays fast. So having enough opinions that you can stay performant without having to, jump through hoops is really, really important. So, and for us, we believe that the web platform can be just as performant as native, but it's sometimes easy to make performance mistakes if you don't have that kind of structure in place. So Vue has really done a great job providing those guardrails and those patterns that keep you fast and stay fast, which is really important. So we rolled out the official version of Ionic Vue about a month ago. So it's very, very new. And if you look at the history of Ionic, we released the first version in 2014, or end of 2013, early 2014 on AngularJS, Angular 1. And so it's been, 6 years now, and Vue just came out. So it's exciting for us because it really feels like the beginning. But it was also a chance for us to, and one of the reasons it took so long is we saw Vue 3 coming out, and we felt like that was really the time to build, the best combo of Vue.js and Ionic on Vue 3. I think we're one of the very first UI frameworks that supports Vue 3. We're really proud of that. And I feel like it's just the perfect time to really be jumping into the Vue ecosystem. So the core focus or goal with Ionic for Vue was to keep it as native Vue as possible. So it's just Vue at the end of the day. So shipping native Vue 3 components that work like Vue developers expect, that work like anything else. But one of the things that's really interesting about Ionic compared to other technologies that have a different rendering engine underneath is that Ionic uses the browser and the DOM rendering engine. So that means pretty much any Vue library that supports Vue 3 and runs in the browser, you can use in your Vue apps, which is really, really great. We want to work and be compatible with all popular Vue libraries, as long as they support Vue 3. On top of that, we have integration with the Vue CLI, and we're going to be increasing that integration. Really, the point is we want to use the Vue toolkit. We don't want to have necessarily a different way that you have to use, a different thing that you have to learn to build Ionic apps when you could just use the Vue tool chain. That's really a goal of ours. And then including that, we've integrated deeply with Vue Router. So there's no special Ionic routing system you have to learn. We just use the standard Vue toolchain. So there's a build here. So we rolled this out. We did the beta in the middle of September. We did the final release last month, and we've just been blown away at the reception. I think, we had a running joke here at Ionic because every time we tweet anything, no matter what it was about, people would always say, like, when's Vue coming? What about Vue? It's like the only thing I care about is Vue. And now that it's out, I'm so thrilled because I think what those developers were asking for was just their two favorite things put together, and the two things that were spiritually aligned kind of put together. So we are absolutely thrilled. It's good for us to see this traction because it's just like an obvious motivator to keep investing in it, which is what we're doing. So thank you for letting us know that you wanted us to do this. But none of this would be possible without some amazing contributions from the community. I've got a few shout outs that I want to make. One of those is Dolby Producer, I think, if I'm saying that right, who's built a bunch of Vue templates, helped us test a lot of Vue early releases, really been kind of a supporter from the beginning. So thank you so much. I want to shout out to Aaron Saunders, who queued up a bunch of Vue blog posts, kind of ready to go with the release, who does a ton of tutorials on Vue, who is very active on the Ionic forum. So one of the things a lot of people don't know, because we have a lot of people new to Ionic right now, is that we have a very popular forum. So if you go to forum.ionicframework.com, the chances are there's someone there who could answer your question about Ionic, whether it's about Vue, whatever. We're happy to help. It's kind of like your own personal Stack Overflow. So, and Aaron is very active on there. He also runs a agency that's one of our trusted partners called Clearly Innovative. And so huge shout out to Aaron. With that, I'm going to shut up and pass it over to Mike, who's going to get into the good stuff that you want to see, which is real code. So Mike, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Super excited to be giving this demo. We're going to kind of just preface this. there are two unstaged changes in this repo because 5.5 came out like 5 minutes ago while Max was giving this presentation. So I have everything updated live. So fingers crossed, this is a really stable release. Um, if you are someone who wants to get started with Ionic in Vue, probably the easiest way to do so is to actually install our CLI. Ionic ships with its own CLI, which is really just a tool for creating new projects, building out your native app, and also building out the infrastructure needed to create different framework projects. So if we had, say, npm install /g Ionic CLI, we can get the new CLI installed, which will recognize Vue projects. Also, it's a pretty nice reminder to do this, like, I don't know, once a month at least, to get the latest version, the latest improvements, because we're constantly iterating on the CLI. I already have this installed, so I don't need to actually run this. But if you wanted to actually start a new project, you could run Ionic Start. And this is going to give you a little framework picker that you can choose your framework of choice. So in this one, we're going to be focusing on Vue. We can give it a name if we want it, say, my Vue test app. I could pick and choose the different side menus, template starters that I want to use. For this, we have tabs, which is a pretty self-explanatory, tabs interface starting project, a side menu, blank starter if you just want to build out your own thing and you really don't need, any help getting started, or a full like list component, which has a little bit more visual aspects in there. I don't need to do any of this because, you know, instead of risking downloading everything live on a stream, I've prepared it like a good presenter should. So we have our Vue project here, and if we just print out what we have, a standard Vue project. So we have our package.json, our public directory, some tests, configurations for Cypress, Babel, and Jest. And if we were to open up our editor, we could just say go to our main.ts and see that we are indeed using a Vue for this. We have the imports for our main app component, the router, the main Ionic Vue utility, some core styles for everything. So if you wanted to, you could swap these out for just a single bundle. But maybe you don't need the normalize or some of these different CSS utilities. You can totally remove them if that's something that you want to do. But we really just have this app instance that we are creating and bootstrapping a brand new Vue app. Nothing in here is very specific to Ionic other than just use Vue or Ionic Vue. So integrating like a nice Vue library should. And again, utilizing the router to mount our app once everything has been instantiated. So I'm going to run Ionic Serve down here. And what you'll notice is that this is actually using Vue CLI service serve. So when we create a new Vue project, we'll actually be able to detect, all right, I'm in a Ionic Vue project. We should call the Vue CLI service and be able to integrate with whatever that is. So if you have your own customizations, I know the Vue CLI service allows you to customize what plugins or Webpack loaders you could use. How should you be enabling hot module replacement, etc. This is totally something that you can customize, and we'll be able to support that and not dictate what your development experience should be. Inside of our app, we're going to take a look quickly at this router. So if we go to our router.index, we have this component that we're importing, or this package that we're importing, called Ionic Vue Router. Now, we've actually worked with Eduardo from the who's been maintaining the Vue Router to figure out what's the best way to integrate Ionic's own native stack navigation paradigm with something like Vue Router. And what what we came up as being the best solution was to create this create router function, which wraps Vue router's own internal logic. This way, you have the same Vue router experience that you're used to getting, but we can provide some higher level functionality like integrating our stack navigation, integrating animations and gesture support, all without you having to configure this yourself. So as we go through here, we have this redirect to our very first tab, the route definition for all of these different tabs. We're using dynamic import, so all of this just works right out of the box because we're not reinventing the wheel. Going further around, we have this create router, which is again from Ionic Vue router, and then we are creating using create web history to again integrate with that stack navigation. So as we go through this, let's open up the app.view component. So this again just kind of shows what we are talking about. We are using a standard view setup. We have template, our Ion app component, and our Ion router outlet. But we're also importing these from Ionic Vue. So we're providing native Vue components that you would have to add to your project, as any user would expect to do. You probably have seen it a few places, and you're definitely seeing it here, where we have this lang equals ts or the different .ts file extensions. Yes, Ionic is using TypeScript for all of its Vue projects because TypeScript just gives you I would say, better developer experience. Not only are you getting type safety, being able to deeply understand what it is that you are working with and what the structure of all these different of your code. It's just once you get things like completion, go to definition. Once you have that all put together, you just don't want to go back. But we understand that not everyone wants to use TypeScript. So if you don't want to use TypeScript and you want to opt out of it, you can just delete that from your project and it'll automatically update. Again, we do think that you should use it though, as it's probably going to catch a lot more bugs than you could by just looking at your own code. So inside of this app, we have our 3 tabs. We can navigate to each one of the tabs, update the UI that we have in the component, but we're also updating this URL and creating what is essentially 3 different navigation containers. So let's actually go ahead and create a new route for this. So I'm just going to copy this real quick, and I'm going to create a new route definition, something called children, and it's going to be an array. And inside of this, I'm going to paste this new route, save this, and then I'm going to go to our tab1.view. Now in here, we are just, again, utilizing a lot of Ionic's components. So this is going to give us our basic structure, layout based on Flexbox, our header, which is pretty self-explanatory, this parent container that just houses all the different toolbars. This main content area inside of here, which is housing the Explorer container component, as well as this secret header, which we can see in a little bit. But I want to come in here. I'm actually going to delete the Explorer component, and I'm going to add an Ion button, and then add a router link to. We'll go to tabs, tab 1, and just to make sure I added it correctly, tab 2 as the path. So we're doing some kind of go to tab 2. We're doing some kind of nested navigation here. Obviously, we're reusing one component that is also going to be rendered in another component. So let's kind of complete what we have here to make sure that this works. So we also need to add an import for Ion button. And again, like I said, we are using TypeScript, so we get the things like completion, kind of understanding what are all these components. Um, Pretty nice. We can delete this explore container, delete it here, and then add a new entry for Ion button. Hit save. Cool. So we have this component here. So let's go to tab 2. Let's go to tab 2. Well, we're still on the tab 1 icon down here. We could go to tab 2 and maintain two separate navigation stacks, which is pretty nice. You notice that we don't really have a way to go back though. So let's go to tab 2 and fix that. So tab 2 is basically based on the same setup that we had in tab 1. And really what we need to do is add two things. We need to add this Ion buttons component and then this Ion back button component as well. Now, the back button is pretty self-explanatory. It allows us to navigate back. And then this Ion buttons component is a little bit more specialized. It essentially allows us to lay out all of the different buttons that could exist in, say, a toolbar and have them lay out in a pretty logical fashion. So they're all going to be displayed vertically or horizontally next to one another in the way that you author them here. We also need to tell the Ion buttons that we should render in the start position of our Ion toolbar. Basically, since we are utilizing web components under the hood here, we can make use of these slot properties to say render this in this position. There is a little thing here where we are getting some diagnostics saying that slot attributes are deprecated. This is only specific to Vue and not necessarily the underlying web components, so this is safe to ignore. We'll go further down to our script tag over here, and again, we need to import Ion buttons and then Ion button itself or Ion back button, and then declare them down into our component Ion back button and then Ion buttons. We will go back and save our app, and then we'll navigate forward. And great, we have our navigation. If we go to tab 2, the navigate back button doesn't really have another stack to go back to or another view in the navigation stack, so it doesn't need to show it. We go to tab 1, we have another view to navigate back to, and we can go back to it. So this is kind of getting across the idea that Ionic has stack navigation. It has this concept of using different views and having them be able to maintain their own history separate from, tab 2, from tab 3, and maintain all that separately, just like a native app would. So if we go in further along, this is pretty nice. It's just running in the browser. What does this look like on a device? Well, we can actually make use of Capacitor here to deploy this Vue app to our native iOS device. So I'm just going to do this npm Ionic build. Again, it's going to call the Vue CLI services to run build. It's going to build for production, which is great. It's what we want. Cool. This is all set. Let's actually go through and deploy this to our iOS device. So I'm going to run npx cap sync iOS. And if you're not sure what cap is, it's our CLI utility for Capacitor. If you think writing cap is kind of short and you would like to type more, Capacitor, you could also run npx capacitor, and that will sync the entire project with our native iOS project. I've already created that behind the scenes because, well, let's face it, CocoaPods can be very slow. But let's go over and open up Xcode. Then open up our simulator, and I'm just going to do a fresh build over here. If you've never used Xcode before, it can look intimidating. It's just iTunes for native. You don't really need to worry about it too much. Cool. Our app works. You can see we have this secret header that wasn't showing in our desktop version. That's only because it's needed for iOS. iOS has this concept of a large header or a collapsible header. This way, as you start to scroll, the header will collapse into the top of the app and kind of appear like a normal iOS header should look like. So this is great. Our app looks good across the different tabs. The safe area down here for the tab bar and the safe area up here in the header are all respected. If we go to tab 2, we have our navigation. Again, we could have the collapsible header, which is so much fun to play with. We can go to tab 2, maintain the stack navigations. We can even start to swipe to go back, which is probably the best part about the whole entire thing is that these gestures just work. So they're fun. I didn't have to wire any of that up. It's just provided by the router and all the work done behind the scenes by Ionic Vue Router. Now, this is all great, and if we were just to show off how to build an Ionic Vue app by just showing you the visual aspects of it, we could end here. But I do want to actually attempt to show off some native integration because that's really one of the big selling points with Ionic. You can integrate a web app and have a native app and access the same native features without having to change the code that you write. So let's go over and you know what? We could just constantly have these builds. I'm going to have a little secret over here. We could say Ionic cat run iOS. We're going to pass this live reload flag. And because it's running on simulator, we need to pass this external flag, which all this means is make the API, make the URL that you're going to host this from accessible. So I'm going to hit play. We're going to have it deploy to our simulator again. We have this little warning down here saying that using app serve from such and from this URL. So this means that if we go to our tab 1 and say, let's change this title to say, hello world, just to test this out. Cool. We now have live reload serving on our simulator. And again, this is using Vue CLI service. So we are using hot module replacement. So our rebuilds are like incredibly fast. Let's go forward and actually start getting some geolocation data. It's one of the more common things that you see people want to do inside their apps. I feel like every app these days that you open up is just wanting to know your location. So let's import that from say at capacitor core, and we're going to import this from. We're going to import this plugins object, which is going to house all of the plugin APIs for capacitor. We also need to install or import a few things from Vue. So we're going to import, again, if I could only type from Vue, we're going to import ref. And what we are going to do is utilize setup to create a new way of handling data and setting up our bindings instead of our app. This is a Vue 3 feature, which they call Composability. If you haven't tried it before, take a look at the Vue 3 docs. It's pretty fun. So what we have here in setup is we're going to create a new const. We'll say location data, and it's going to equal a ref. And we're going to set this default value to just be an empty object. And then we're going to create a function called get location. This is going to equal an async function. And inside of it, we're going to just destructure from the plugins object from before. And inside of this, we're going to grab the geolocation object inside of off of plugins. So what we can say is const results is going to equal await geolocation dot get current position. Again, if you're still not sold on TypeScript, the fact that I'm just getting all the completion printed out even in Vim is pretty nice. So as we go further along, we'll get the result from geolocation.getCurrentPosition. And then we'll say location data dot value is going to equal a new object where we will have this lat key. And this is going to equal results dot coordinates. And here we get to see one of the big benefits of using Ionic and really using Capacitor. We get all of the different keys that you could get from geolocation. So if we were to say deploy this to a browser, we'd only get latitude and longitude and accuracy because those are only built into the web API for geolocation. Where things like altitude, heading, and more kind of fine-grained location data are only provided on the native platforms, we can safely code around this and be sure that we're getting the right things for our app. So we're trying to get the latitude here. We'll just select latitude. We'll select long and say results.coords.longitude. And our app is good to go. Now, again, this is just using composability, composition and view. So what we need to do by the end of this is return a new object, which is going to have our location data and our get location. So all of this, double check, looks good. No issues found. So up here, we could add a new button where we, instead of using a router link, we'll just create a click handler. And we'll say click, get location. And inside, we'll say, where am I? And above all of this, we'll just create a simple little paragraph tag where we will render out location data to the DOM. So let's hit save. Okay, so our app, again, I want to point out how fast that reload is. If we were to say add a new H1 and type where is Mike, it's just so fast and so very satisfying. So over here, we'll say, where am I? Wait for that to go. Look at Xcode, see if there's any issues. What we'll end up doing is just making sure that you have everything spelled correctly. And what we can test is just do some, we'll go to the browser and test this as well. So we'll open up Chrome. We'll say, where am I? Cool, I have this working well in Chrome. So what's probably happening here is we just have some cached stuff happening inside of hot module replacement. So I'm just going to do this again real quick to let it run and reload. This happens every now and then with hot module replacement where you just have a bad cache. But hopefully a quick rebuild should just solve all of our issues. Cool. So where am I? Well, my geolocation is actually being a spoofed data, so you don't really know where I am, but we have the location data coming back from the simulator. We had a little hiccup, but you know what? It's not the end of the world because we got everything up and running real quick. Now, this is kind of a whirlwind tour, but we cover a lot of all these different aspects of Ionic and Capacitor in a Capacitor Getting Started or in an Ionic Vue Getting Started guide that we have on our docs. So if you really want to dive into this more, definitely go check those docs out. It's ionicframework.com/docs/view/quick start. So I want to go in and actually uh, get our slides back. So slides. Bear with me one moment while I juggle multiple displays. And I will present, get this going. Cool. So that was our demo. We kind of showed over, kind of did a quick whirlwind tour of everything Ionic has. We didn't even scratch the surface. Like we could go into the theming capabilities of Ionic. We can go into some of the customizations that you can do with the animations. But really hope that you all are encouraged to go check this out and at least play around with it a little bit more. One of the big One of the more awesome aspects of this is that, like you said, we're just utilizing Vue. So I think working with Ionic and Vue has it's kind of made me feel a little bit more excited about working with JavaScript frameworks these days. Vue hits a lot of really great points. The fact that we have Vue 3 here just really solidifies all those awesome aspects that Vue promotes. Like Max mentioned earlier, it's simple to get started with. The concepts are easy to adapt and include in your current app. And if you have a greenfield project, Vue is a great solution and is a great option, especially if you're working with Ionic. If you want to get started, again, those resources, you can go to ionicframework.com/docs/view/overview. If you wanted to get more details on, say, Capacitor, you go to capacitorjs.com/docs. And like Max mentioned, we have our own dedicated forum.ionicframework.com. We have split out. You could use ask generic questions about Ionic, ask questions about Capacitor, or ask questions about Ionic Vue specifically. So, really excited about all this. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I do want to bring Max back up here, and let's go through some Q&A and see the. I see the chat has been incredibly active during all of this.
Hey, Mike. Before you do that, I just want to say one thing, because there's been a number of people who have brought up that they're using other Vue toolkits. And before we get into that, we didn't really talk about Capacitor, but one thing we did recently, well, I guess not recently, but somewhat recently, is we built a project called Capacitor. And Capacitor is essentially a new version of Cordova, a new version of PhoneGap. And the goal of Capacitor is it'll take pretty much any modern web app and run it on iOS and Android. So the point is, if you're using Vue already, if you're using like Quasar or whatever, you're happy with it, that's awesome. If you want to bring that app to the app stores, use Capacitor to do it. Ionic Vue is going to use Capacitor under the hood as well. So just want to point that out. Like we're thrilled if you just use Capacitor and don't use Ionic Vue. We want you to use whatever you're happy with, but Capacitor is really the runtime that's going to enable you to bring that to the App Store.
Yeah, all good points. All good points. Okay, so let's kind of go over some of the questions. And this one just seems like the most fun one to answer. What's the name of the text editor that I'm using? I will preach the the gospel of Vim to anybody. I like to work in Vim. You don't have to use Vim if you don't want to. VS Code is also probably a better solution. There's also JetBrains, WebStorm, any of those products that are also good editors. So don't pay too much attention to what editor I'm using.
We have two Vimmers here, you and I.
Yeah.
I'm also a Vim user. I'm more of I'll call it like a Vim's extension user. Like I use the core set of the commands, but I don't use Vim itself. I just bring them into whatever tool I'm using. But I think Mike is the master Vim user here. So
we'll call you Vim Lite.
I'm Vim Lite. Thank you.
Let's see. Let's kind of go over a great question from Joshua. Ionic provide a way to check device capabilities before trying to access specific device APIs like camera, location, etc. Ionic itself would definitely, you definitely would do this more in the capacitor approach. Capacitor, again, all the APIs are promises. So you could use try catch, you could use traditional promises and just uh, handle the failures or handle if a feature is not there gracefully by just catching that error. Um,
Yeah,
don't know.
this.
We
Well, I was going to say this is a big part of Capacitor because you're running an app on iOS and Android and the web. So obviously, you're going to run into situations where you've got an API that doesn't work on the web. And so one of the design goals of Capacitor, which every Ionic app is going to use, is this concept of graceful uh, or detection of features and correctly handling errors when something's not available. So you're going to wrap all those calls in try catch. They're going to throw if it's not available. And you can also just detect the platform you're running on. So you do have to do some of that stuff where you're going to say, okay, on web, I need to do this for some routines, but we try to make that really easy.
Yeah, and if there is certain APIs that are not available, or if that throw actually happens, it's not going to bring down your entire app and cause a huge crash. It's just going to gracefully say, "Hey, this API is not available," and you can handle that by presenting your own kind of interface or just swallowing the error and not letting your users know. Let's see, what do we got? Um, there was one question I saw pop up during things, and I really want to bring it up. Here we go. Are we planning to share performance results between different solutions, maybe including third-party or not Ionic to measure the difference? And I think I want to, you know, performance is a very, very tricky thing to measure and to measure accurately and consistently across all the different frameworks or all the different solutions. The tests that we've done with Ionic Vue, Capacitor, and everything, we are getting, very performant apps, 60 frames per second, uh, and we're also writing probably very efficient code on our end. Performance in general, when you start talking about that, it tends to be like, okay, what is the code that you're writing? Look at your code first, and then look at your framework. If your code is efficient and fast and works really well without any JavaScript framework, that's great. Then it's time to look at the tools you're using. So sharing performance results between different solutions is kind of a weird way to compare things. I don't necessarily think that we would probably share any results like that because we're not going to be able to figure out what code are you writing.
Yeah, people ask us a lot like, hey, which framework should I use? Angular, React, or Vue? Like, which one's faster? X, Y, and Z. And it's just that is so difficult to answer because there's so many factors. Are you using lazy loading? Are you using other libraries? Et cetera, et cetera. So we try to stay out of that and say, okay, you go make the decision for the framework that you want to use, for the framework your team wants to use. There's tons of publicly available data about what you should use, and we'll help you bring that to mobile. That's where we are, I think, when we talk about which one we recommend.
Here. Uh, I'll bring
I
that
laughed
back
about
up.
that one.
I've been using Vim for 2 years now, only because I don't know how to get out of it. You and me both, Josh. You and me both. This is a really good one, and I think it definitely brings up the kind of the big features of Vue in general. Is can you adapt a project with small pieces of Ionic Vue? Yes. So Ionic Vue, all the components are lazy loaded. You can import them as you need them. In the project that we looked at, I was only importing the components I needed for that specific view or that specific route. So if you have an existing Vue app and you want to say import a single Ionic button, you just would import that component, register it with your Vue component, and then just render it in the template. Um, really great part about about Vue is that is doable because it's not always the case in every other framework that exists out there.
Hey, Mike, there was one about global registering of components that we should talk about. Or actually, several people have asked that because you had to go and import, I think, like 10 Ionic components
Exactly.
in your demo, right? So
Yeah.
there is actually a official documentation page about this. We support both local registering and importing and global registering and importing. So we recommend local for performance reasons because when your component imports just what it uses, then it's much easier to lazy load those components, tree shake what you're not using, etc. If you globally register, it does save you time when you're building the component, right? But you run the risk of having a suboptimal setup. But really, you're free to make that trade-off. And so in the quick start docs that we had in the slides, there's a section on optimizing your build. You can do global and save some of those precious keystrokes.
Yeah, the registering components globally has kind of just I spent too much time in other frameworks and other languages where global imports were just kind of frowned upon. Um, Obviously, like Max said, for performance reasons, you probably don't want to uh, have everything globally registered. But if your app is small enough and you can get away with it, it's always a solution. And we got Mr. Dolby Producer joining us as well. What store solutions do you recommend? Vuex still isn't supported on Vue 3. Um, I don't necessarily know too many stored like state management solutions for Vue other than Vuex. You could build your own. I think Vue gives you pretty much the same APIs that are available in other frameworks that encourage you to make your own state management solution. You could do something um, with refs, with different solutions that are all kind of made up on your own, um, and get pretty far with just that. Now, Max, you've written a few state management solutions in your day.
I've certainly used a lot as well.
Mm.
I don't know. I can't speak to the ones that support V3, but I mean, UX seems like that's got to be close behind, right? And that's the most popular, by far, popular state management library. So I assume that's going to be supporting V3 fairly soon.
Yeah, fairly soon. I mean, we are probably one of the first Vue 3 libraries out there, so we're very early to the party. But I would expect to see the entire ecosystem, catch up very quickly. Let's see, find one other question that came up real quickly.
I mean, the other thing is you could always use probably any Redux, like vanilla Redux would probably work fairly out of
Mobex
the
is
box.
also a good solution too, and that's framework independent. There we go. Uh, what testing frameworks are used by default? So Ionic Vue will actually give you Jest and Cypress by default. So for all your unit tests, you would just use Jest. For all your end-to-end tests, you would use Cypress. If you don't want to use that and you want to use something different, you can totally remove those config files and add your own solution. This seems to be the one that most of the JavaScript community has kind of settled on as being like the preferred way. Um, so we figured why not just use those two testing frameworks and provide them by default. But you're totally free to make up your own solutions if that is something that you would like to do.
Hey, Mike, there's one question about what's the difference between Ionic's components and some of the plain HTML controls. I can't see it in here, but yes, that one. So yeah, so I guess the question is kind of why do you need to have something like Ion label versus using the label tag or Ion input versus input? And that the reason that is the case is because there are a fair number of mobile specific patterns that you just don't get out of the box when you use standard HTML controls. So Ion Label handles things like showing a different stacking setup, showing floating labels that actually animate when you enter the input, things that is just out of the scope of HTML, plain browser configuration. So we add all these components that really supercharge those things, or touch driven. I'm trying to think of another example that you'd want to use our stuff instead of the core ones. Buttons have material design, ripple effects. So that's the reason why. There's actually a lot of work, a lot of research, a lot of testing that goes into making sure those components behave like you expect on mobile.
I would probably add on to that. Most of the reasons why you would want to use them is just the small details that you probably don't even notice at first glance. For example, like the Ion input, that reports back keyboard events. So as the keyboard opens on mobile devices, we're able to adapt that and make sure that the input you're focusing actually stays perfectly centered in the viewport, and that all of the other components inside of your app properly lay out to account for that. So it's more than just because they look good. There's also the interaction between different components that really makes it you know better than the built-in HTML stuff.
Um, I want to address maybe more of a controversial question, or questions, multiple ones. I don't think there's one you need to pick to put up there, but just kind of questions about like who's using Ionic. Is it widely regarded as a serious solution for building apps? And the answer is absolutely yes. In fact, if you go and look at, we use a service called AppFigures, which tracks usage in the App Store. Ionic framework apps power 15% plus of both of the app stores together. So that's the Apple App Store, the Google Play Store. It's very widely used. And we, like I said, we're a real business that actually, like, we have hundreds of enterprise customers who are building really serious apps on top of Ionic. And our primary business is on the commercial side is serving them and making them successful. And then we also obviously invest heavily in open source at the same time. And those customers are thrilled with Ionic. They've got apps with millions and millions of users, billions of dollars of revenue going through them. And so kind of the proof is in the pudding. I think in this case, there's just so much adoption of it. There's so many web developers out there who are looking for ways to build apps, but still use all their existing web technology. And Ionic is really, the leader for that. So we've been around for a while. We're not going anywhere. So
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. I think probably take one.
Yeah, and just before I say that, like we got here only supporting Angular. That's what's so exciting is we didn't support anything except for Angular until a year ago when we released the first version of React. Now we just added Vue. So I feel like, we're just getting started in terms of actually achieving our mission of helping every web developer build mobile apps, not just Angular developers.
Here. Good points. I think I'm looking for some questions. Yeah, I think we got a lot of the big ones. One of the ones that I think I did see, and I can't see it right now, was just kind of again why Ionic versus say Flutter, say React Native, kind of why Ionic over anything else. And I think Max, you have some thoughts on this, but I would say probably one of the big reasons why is you're a web developer. Um, you are comfortable writing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and you don't necessarily want to learn how to develop something with Dart, React Native. You just want to write stuff for the web and have a web app, native app, without having to adjust your code change what you write or have separate projects per platform. You can have a progressive web app. You can have a native iOS app and a native Android app, all of the same components, all of the same code base, not really changing anything. Um, it's just pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And the fact that you can use the standard browser development process, you could build upwards of 95% of the app directly in your browser and the browser dev tools, which is amazing. And especially if you use Capacitor, because Capacitor is built to be a JavaScript library that runs on all those platforms and abstracts away those details. So you won't feel like you're running a slimmed down version. You'll be running the full app, which is great. And like Mike said, it really comes down to, are you a web developer or do you want to be a different type of developer? So for us, we focus exclusively on web developers. We love JavaScript. It's the language that we're fully invested in TypeScript. We want to build libraries and utilities and components that work on the web just as well as they work on mobile. So that's really our thing. And I think there's no other option really, except for other web frameworks, like to have that kind of trade-off where you're compatible with every single web library. I use the example from React, but if you look at React, there's like 20 times the amount of installations of the React DOM library than there is React Native. So the vast majority of React development is happening in the web. And so I think Vue is the same case. Like most people are building Vue web apps. And so our pitch to you as a Vue developer is use all that same code, use all those libraries that already work in your Vue web apps and bring them to mobile. That's really the pitch.
Yeah, if you got like a Vue Canvas app library or component, and you want to add that to your app, you can do that with Ionic. Can't necessarily do that with any other solution out there because we are just built on the web. And I think that makes a good point to wrap up the stream. Thank you everyone for joining. This has been a lot of fun. We're really excited about Ionic and Vue, and we're just so thrilled to have it done, and we don't have to answer the question anymore. Where's Ionic Vue? What's the status on it? Install it, play with it, try it today, and definitely tweet at us. Let us know what you thought, what you think of it, what you end up building. We've already seen some pretty awesome stuff, like Max said, from the community, but we want to see more. So let us know your thoughts, and keep on building. Cool. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.